kind of hard to imagine, but 25 years ago or so, when, I guess it would have been 30 years ago, 30 years ago, when Father Kaz and I were novices, there was always a lot of conversation about who we thought might in the group become the provincial. And I don't remember Father Kaz's name or mine ever coming up. I remember other people being mentioned, and as a matter of fact, there was somebody from my novitiate class that was sent to study in Rome so that he could be groomed to become provincial. But you know, God has a very different way of looking at life. It's usually the runt out of the litter. Not that I ever considered myself a runt in any litter. Or it's usually the one that people least anticipate or expect. I mean, think of the apostles themselves. Poor Peter, he was forever putting his foot in his mouth, and yet he was the one who's chosen to be the spokesperson. Think of Paul running around courageously trying to snuff out every follower of Christ that he could find. And then he's called to be the apostle to the Gentiles. God never sees things the way that we see them. Even in today's gospel, everybody is looking at Jesus and they're murmuring so loud that even Jesus audibly hears them. And he refers to himself as the bread come down from heaven. There's another gospel passage which I think is even more powerful, and that's the one with the multiplication of the loaves and the fish. When there's over 5,000 people there, and everyone is getting ready to sit down, and Jesus turns to his apostles and says, "What do we have to feed them with?" And someone steps forward and says, "We've got 2 fish and 5 barley loaves." But what good is that going to be? But Jesus takes that what little we offer and he transforms it. And we know that at the end of the story there were 12 wicker baskets of fragments collected. I remember when I was a novice, there were some who were betting on which month I was going to leave. And when I found out about it, I placed a few wagers myself, which I later collected on by not leaving. I figured I wasn't going to go for sure if money was involved. And for religious, money is always involved. One of the difficult times when I was a Marian was when, in fact, Blessed George Amatalitis was beatified. And I say it was a difficult time for me because I was rather disappointed that I didn't get chosen to be one of the ones who would go to Rome for the beatification. Imagine my aggravation when I found out that Larry Dunn, of all people, would be chosen to be deacon of that Mass, to be rubbing right up against John Paul II through the entire liturgy. It was not really an aggravation, though. I was happy for him as I was happy for several others that were able to make it. And I rested on the memory of the time when I first met John Paul II. I'd only been ordained a couple years myself, and I had been elected to attend a conventus of the Marians in Rome. And one of the things that happened during the conventus was that we had a private audience with the Holy Father. I think there was 42 of us. And I remember very specifically getting an instruction from Father General at that time, Father Donald Portritus of recent memory. And Father Donald Portritus, before I even left the house in the morning, pulled me aside, and grabbing my shoulder sleeve, he pulled me close to himself so that our noses were but inches away, and he said, "Listen, I do not want you to say anything to the Holy Father when you are introduced to him. You are to shake his hand or kiss his ring and then step aside quickly. Is that clear?" And I said, "Yes, Father. Of course I will do that. When have I not done anything you've asked me to do?" When we got to the audience hall, we sat down on these chairs. And I remember that somebody came in and said the Holy Father was going to be a half hour late because something had detained him. And everyone started murmuring, like the crowd in today's gospel. "Why do you suppose the Holy Father is late? Do you think he's having a private audience with the King of Spain? Do you think maybe he's having a meeting with Lech Walesa? Do you think maybe he's doing this, that, or the other thing?" And I turned to the person sitting in the chair next to me and I said, "I guess the Lucy reruns are going a little late today." That was Father Jerry Zalonis that I said that to. And he's still alive, so you can check that out. You can check that story out with him still. I think he remembers, because it was at that point that some very austere Italian-looking cardinal looked straight at me and said, "Shh." And I blushed. And Father General turned around and looked straight at me and did one of these gestures. And I tried not to giggle. And when finally the Holy Father came in, we had already received a talk from that cardinal about all the various things that were in the room. The tapestry that was a gift from Queen Isabella, the chairs that were a gift from Queen Beatrice in the 15th century, and how they had been reupholstered by buffalo hides given to Holy Father Pope Pius XII by none other than some Wild Bill Cody. And again I spoke, and I turned to my seated companion and said, "Gee, nothing new in the room, is there?" And again the cardinal, looking straight at me, said, "You must be an American. You Americans always want to buy new." I tried to be quiet. The Holy Father gave us a wonderful little reflection, and then we all lined up, one after another, like a bunch of penguins. And each of us were introduced to the Holy Father. And for the most part, everybody just shook his hand or kissed his ring and stepped aside. And it came my time. And I kept telling myself, just don't trip. I don't know why. I suddenly got it in my head that I was going to trip on the carpet and fling myself into the Pope's arms. And I started praying to St. Anthony, "Please, don't let me make an ass of myself." I always prayed to St. Anthony about not making an ass of myself because of the story about St. Anthony and the ass. It seems there were people who didn't believe that Jesus Christ was truly present, body and blood, soul and divinity in the Eucharist. And St. Anthony, in a defense of the Eucharist, said, "I don't need to get into a big theological argument with you. You can just starve a donkey or an ass for a week, and then bring him to me, and I will present him with Christ present in the Eucharist, and you present him with a bucket of oats, and we'll see what he does. And that's what they did. They starved that poor little donkey for a week. And at the end of the week, St. Anthony came out with the Blessed Sacrament, and somebody else put down a pile of food for the donkey. And when the donkey was presented, Anthony took up the monstrance with the Blessed Sacrament in it, made the sign of the cross, and the donkey buckled his two front legs and bowed his head. When Anthony removed the Eucharist from everyone's presence, it was only then that the donkey stood back up and then moved over to the food and began eating. And so I always think to myself, please, St. Anthony, don't let me make an ass of myself. You've always had such power and control over even the wild beasts. Keep my feet on the flat. And sure enough, I stepped up to the Holy Father without falling down, and I shook his hand, and I could barely make a smile. I was so nervous. And he looked me straight in the eye as somebody else introduced me, and they said, "This is Father Dan Cambra from Kenosha, Wisconsin." And then the Holy Father asked me a question. And over his shoulder, I could see Father Donald Bertritis staring at me. And the Holy Father said, "Wisconsin? What diocese are you from?" And I said, "Milwaukee." And he said, "Milwaukee? Remember Weakland's diocese?" And I said, "Yes." And I'm thinking to myself, every word I say is only digging a hole for my grave. And he says, "Do you get along well with your ordinary?" And I thought to myself, I should have stayed home today. Because you see, at that particular point, I was having an ongoing theological battle with my ordinary, who really didn't approve of Mercy Sunday. He thought of it as a devotional throwback to pre-Vatican II. And I'm pausing, thinking to myself, do I lie to the Pope and make myself look good that I get along with the ordinary? Or do I tell the truth and deal with the consequences? And so I decided to tell the truth. And I said, "No, Your Holiness, not very well." And it was then that he grabbed my elbow and pulled me close to himself, closer than even Father Donald Bertritis had pulled me close earlier. And he said to me, "Neither do I." For a moment, I thought to myself, take me now. Like Elijah in the first reading, I thought, take me now. I know this isn't going to go well for me in the long run. I've engaged the Pope in conversation, and I can just know that this is not going to serve me well. He then proceeded to lean back and to giggle, which I thought, this is only going to be worse. Everyone's going to want to know, what joke did I tell the Pope? And they're probably all thinking that I'm telling the joke about the Pope driving his chauffeur around the Vatican. But as it was, I leaned back and I pulled a card out of my pocket that had a picture of the Franciscan Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother in their full habits who taught at my school. And I passed him the picture and I said, "Holy Father, the sisters who teach at my school would like you to know that they pray for you every day." And he took the picture and he put it in the chest pocket of his cassock and he said, "Well, you tell them that I'm praying for them also. And that I'm praying for all the good religious who work so hard at spreading the gospel message. And don't give up the struggle with Archbishop Weakland. He means well." And that was the end of that little meeting with him. And I thought for sure that I would never see him again. But somehow somebody told me that he had a fondness for strawberries. And that very same week, before I had returned to the United States, I found myself in a farmer's market just 2 blocks from our house on Via Nomentana, and I bought a great big basket of strawberries. And I had some of the strawberries myself, and they were very good. And I got the bright idea, now that I know where the Pope is, I'll just take these to the Vatican and tell one of his lackeys that it's for the Holy Father. So that's what I did. I washed them, I put them in another little basket, and I took them to the Vatican with me the following day. And I saw somebody that I recognized from the previous meeting, and I said, could you give these to the Holy Father and tell him that they're from the Marians that he met a few days ago? Well, as it turned out, this particular Monsignor said, wait, right there. And he went away. And not even 5 minutes later, he came back. He knew exactly where the Pope was, and the Pope really wasn't very far from where I was. And he said, come with me. And so we walked around the side of the parking area, not too far from the pharmacy in the Vatican. And sure enough, there he was with about 5 or 6 of the guards. And he was just walking in the garden. And we came up to him, and he thanked me for the strawberries, which he and the guards were already eating. And as a matter of fact, I now refer to that as my breakfast with the Pope, because I'll never get any closer than that. At least got to share a few strawberries with him. And I mention that story because I think it says something about Pope John Paul II. I think it says something about priestly ministry in general. And I think it says something about our own Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. It was Abraham Lincoln that usually gets quoted as saying, no man stands so tall as when he bends down to help a child. And I think we all know so many incidences in which Pope John Paul II reached out to some small child, to some small infant, to someone in a wheelchair, the man who inaugurated the days of prayer for the sick and the suffering, the man who inaugurated youth days for the entire church, the man who did so much for so many in so many little ways. He embodied, so to speak, the spirituality of St. Therese, of the little way. The kindness done to a single individual is a kindness done to all humanity. And each of us in our own way need to carry that message forward. Jesus, in blessing the little children, could not possibly bless every child. Jesus, in strengthening the, cleansing the lepers, couldn't cleanse every leper. Jesus, in all the things that he does, all the things that he did, all the things that he ever will do, is forever bread for our journey, our transformation into him, our slow, so to speak, becoming one with him, that in eternity we might see him as he is, and that we might be as he is. The truth of the matter is, every one of the saints is a unique reflection of God in their own little way. And certainly Pope John Paul II has been a reflection of God for all of us. Certainly for the 3 priests who are celebrating their 25th anniversary today. All 3 of us have had several encounters with John Paul. All of us have a deep personal attachment to him. And we probably all became priests and to some measure because of him. I think of some of the priests that I knew when I was first entering the Marians, and most of them have already gone on to their great reward. And the rest of them who haven't gone on still remain beacons of faithfulness, beacons of God's love in maintaining their way of life, of praying first and foremost that they might be one with God, and praying that all of us might be one with God. Each priest is called to pray his divine office, as are religious, called to pray their divine office for the sake of all humanity. And the life of the priest is meant to be for all humanity as well. I remember one of the things that surprised me when I became a priest was finding out that in canon law, I wasn't responsible just for the registered parishioners, but I was responsible for all the souls in my parish, Catholic and non-Catholic, believing and unbelieving. And I remember one of the first things I did as a pastor was to build up a Legion of Mary group, to take a census, to work on developing an RCIA program, because it was one of my thoughts that it would be an important thing that everyone know that they're all welcome here. And very often when I'm out and about, even now, people ask me, where are you from? What parish are you connected with? And I always say, the Shrine of Divine Mercy. Oh, where is that? In Stockbridge. Oh, I think I've gone by there. I never ask them, are you Catholic? I always jump to the immediate thing of, why don't you come and visit sometime? The beautiful grounds. Come see the new Stations of the Cross that we've just put up. Come wander around and listen to the breeze go through the trees. Come at a time when the season is just perfect for your taste. You like warm weather? Welcome to August. Do you like to watch the leaves change? Come in October. You like frozen wastelands? God knows that could happen anytime around here. Come in January while I'm in Florida. For each and every person, I believe that there is something here at this shrine. And the one thing that I believe is most important for each and every one of us to eventually discover is that Christ loves us. And the surest sign that Christ loves us is the people who love us, like John Paul II, like the parish priest, like the religious priests that welcome you here, like the brothers who are preparing for priesthood, for the brothers who are perpetually vowed as brothers to help serve the priest that the priestly ministry might continue as well. It's very important that people understand that we don't do this on our own. We couldn't possibly have this shrine if it weren't for the people that help financially support us, for the people that help support us in prayer, for the people who volunteer their services in big ways and in little ways. You know, sometimes I see people weeding around on the property, and my first thought is, when were they hired? And then I realize they're not wearing any kind of maintenance outfit. They're just volunteers. They just dropped by and noticed that something needed to be done, and they're doing it. And I think to myself, why are they doing it? Occasionally when I've asked people, why do you volunteer here? It always amazes me how they talk about how much peace and love they've experienced here. The woman that frequently cuts my hair happens to be a Unitarian Universalist. And she says she volunteers for Mercy Sunday for something like the last 12 Mercy Sundays in a row. And I think to myself, well, that's kind of odd. A Unitarian Universalist that looks forward to volunteering 12 years in a row at Mercy Sunday here on Eden Hill. But you know what? I believe that God has touched her heart here, and she's met some remarkable people here. And that's what brings her back over and over again. And maybe someday, she might become Catholic. Maybe not. But in the short run of things, every now and then I know she tells people about this place. She reminds them that this isn't just for Catholics. And she reminds me that there are a wide circle of people that come here because they experience love. If the priesthood is not about love, then it's not the Catholic priesthood. If the priesthood is not about bending down to help a child, then it's not the Catholic priesthood. Each of the three of us, Larry, Kaz, and myself, all have had long times of service with God's people, even before we became priests. But since we became priests, I think I can honestly say we have enjoyed, if not every minute of it, at least every week of it. Priesthood is kind of like marriage. It's not the day-to-day things that we celebrate. It's in the experiences that cover a lifetime, those little moments that mean so much. And I hope that for each of you that are here today, you go home with a new story about why it is you feel it's important to support the Marians and their ministry here on Eden Hill. Because I think you can see there's an ever-widening circle of young men that are coming here to enter the priesthood, to enter religious life. And with each passing year, as we see a new flood of vocations, I think back to Pope John Paul II and his talk about the new springtime of the church, of how there would be a blossoming of vocations that we Marians feel we've already begun seeing, but a blossoming of vocations that can only be sustained by your love which comes from Christ, Christ's love which comes from the Father, the source of every good gift. May God continue to bless us all.